Nice to see you. How you doing? You ready for tomorrow? What's happening tomorrow? There's a thing. I can't keep track of holidays. No, there's about 3 holidays I keep track of. All the other ones that people in normal jobs get, I never remember. Because if somebody wants to see a house, I'm probably gonna go, regardless of the day. Except for Thanksgiving, Christmas, Hanukkah, whichever thing you might do, and a couple other ones. But you got to claim your time. That's what this business is about. Just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? And that's a struggle I think a lot of new agents get into is they know that everyone knows they have this thing on their hip, so they have to answer it, but we don't. That's the first big lesson. There's a balance, right, between needing the money and not burning out. So that first year, you learn that lesson pretty quickly. And to me, everything is an appointment. It may not be the client's business what kind of appointment it is. It's an appointment to cut my fingernails, but I need some me time. And so, no, I can't show that house in 20 minutes. You haven't even done the things I ask you to do, like get pre-approved. You know, you need to keep people, accountable. So it's real easy in this entrepreneurial world of 1099 and 24/7 service and a lot of competition that we compromise, and sometimes to the detriment of ourselves and maybe even our family. So that's important to find that balance. Hopefully you guys have that balance in place and don't struggle with that. But one of many challenges that come with this business. The other one, of course, is the way the income is structured, right? That big lump sum. And if you've never worked in that type of situation, it feels sort of like you're winning the lottery sometimes when you do finally get that closing, because you've got this check for multiple thousands, and you got to remember, this isn't a check for 10,000 like it says on the front of this check. This is probably a check for maybe 3 or 4,000 after you set aside a chunk for taxes, a chunk for insurance, a chunk for this and that, because the checks we've all gotten in normal jobs have already had those things deducted. So just a little free advice there, things to remember and put it all in perspective. Have you been seeing, now that we've been talking about agencies so much, have you been noticing more in the news, the headlines about the commission lawsuits by chance? I'm just curious. Yeah, a couple of you. Yeah, it's getting juicy, guys. Oh my gosh, it is getting crazy out there. The minute one of the lawsuits was won by the plaintiff, challenging the way commissions are handled and structured, 8 more were filed like the very next day. So it's a classic class action type of situation. I feel like the lawsuits were mostly spurred on by the attorneys. You know, I think some plaintiff, some consumer had an issue, talked to an attorney, and the attorney realized this could get big. But is it really going to help the consumer by the time it's all said and done? What are we dealing with now? Tell me, as a review of what we've covered so far, who right now in the method that we currently work within and for the last several years, how does the money get routed? Where does the commission start? Who pays the commission, the total commission? Who's paying that total commission? There we go. So if we have that property for $400,000 sales price, and let's say that agent negotiated a 5% commission, what's the total commission getting paid by that seller? Some of you have said seller in the chat. What's getting paid by that seller in dollars? We got 400,000 at 5%, just 400 times the 5%, right? So $20,000 is what we're talking about. Now, who's getting the $20,000? Who is it? Good. In the chat, go ahead, guys, and give me some kind of responses. Got listing agent and buyer agent. I got firm. Those are great answers. You know what the answer is right now at this stage with the amount of information that I've given you so far? We don't know. We don't know who's involved yet. You are all correct potentially. What if there is no buyer's agent? Then who's getting that $20,000? Who gets it then? Because that's what it's about. That seller is saying to their listing agent, okay, you charge 5% commission, I'll pay it. However it goes down, if there is no buyer agent, then yes, exactly right, Caroline. The listing firm and their agent keeps it all, theoretically. So initially, we've got a seller and a listing agent on a listing appointment. And that agent is saying to the seller, okay, seller, here's what I charge, 5%. You willing to pay it? Seller says, yeah, okay. It might go somewhat differently, but let's say that's what agreement they come down to. And the seller might say, okay, listing agent, that's a lot of money. What are you giving me for that money? What are you doing for that money? That's a fair question, isn't it? You're going to want to know that. If you're paying somebody $20,000, you're going to want to know what they're going to do to earn it. And so that agent on that appointment is going to say, well, I will get your house sold through various means. I will try to get it sold through lots of different means. What are some ways that you know about, maybe you've experienced, that agents get houses sold? How can an agent find a buyer for a house? What are some of those ways when you're listing and trying to sell a house? There it is. Open houses. The very public, very obvious, especially on HGTV. Here's the trade secret. Might be a little higher these days, but traditionally the typical percentage chance of the house selling because of an open house has been about 1% chance. I think it's higher now because of the low level of inventory, but probably still in the single digits. But yes, that does cost money. And if the seller expects it and the agent wants to keep that seller happy, still doesn't change the fact that they're going to do it, spend the money, spend the time doing it. So yeah, open house is going to be used and money will be spent, time will be spent toward that. Another one, yeah, there you go. MLS, that's a big one. The one where probably most people are really, really wanting to hire that agent. That's why they're hiring the agent. Oh boy, still having issues. Try this. So open house, MLS, what else? Virtual tours, there you go. And I'll just go ahead and add on to that photography, like nice photography, not just pull out the iPhone, forget to even wipe off the lens. You know, when you take iPhone photos, who wipes off the lens? It's just a thing that I try to remember to do. And depending on the expectation, depending on the competition, you need to have probably pretty decent photography done, like maybe even professional photography. I'll just say photos, video perhaps, video walkthroughs, virtual tours being maybe still pictures put into a slideshow sort of an arrangement. So all that sort of thing. And what else we have? Social media, you bet. And with social media, boy, do you have a couple hours? Because we could go into quite a few details there. Instagram, Facebook, even TikTok, any sort of paid YouTube, paid ads, the free stuff too. It's not enough just for that agent to put it on their Facebook wall so their friends see it. they probably need to put some money behind it to push it out to a certain audience they've picked. So it's more than just, hey, I put it on my Facebook, and a lot of agents don't even have a YouTube channel. It could be networking, meaning their own little network of agents they know who've sold in the area. They might even have to go out and cultivate a list. I've done that before, email by email, one by one. I've gone out and said, on the MLS, I've done a search for houses that have sold similar to this one, sold and currently active. And I've gone down through and picked, cut and pasted emails of all those agents. Maybe came up with a list of 50 or 100. And then send out to them just because they might have leftover buyers that didn't like their particular listing. It's a lot of stuff. It could be a broker open house. So there's public open houses and broker specific open houses. There's a ton of potential places to spend that money. There's a lot of places to spend it wrong too. But if we go down through this list and we just think, what is this list? This is how ways that we might find a buyer. What about this next one? We might find a buyer, and it's kind of related to this last one, through other agents. And that's where offering a cooperative amount to share that 5% comes in. Because remember, it was $400,000 at 5%, $20,000 total. And a savvy listing agent's going to say, let me not be greedy. Let me share some of that $20,000. If you can see it, you know that's behind my big head. And so, yeah, through other agents, either because they came about because you reminded them through this custom network you reached out, or just because it was sitting there on the MLS. And maybe they had set up a search and their client found it or saw it because the agent set up a search that automatically emailed the client with houses in that criteria. However it is, maybe just a complete stumbled across it in a random MLS search. But that's huge. Other agents cooperating, as we talked about on the very first day of Chapter 7, the cooperation is huge. We've got, I'm not even sure how many are in the Charlotte MLS right now, but once upon a time there were 12,000. I'm sure it's more than that now. 12,000 agents. And they don't all have a buyer, but some of them have 10 or 15. Some have 0, some have 1 or 2. That's a lot more than I have all by myself. So there's power there. And so, yeah, you'd be really smart to say, let me share this 20 with an agent bringing the buyer. So instead of me getting that entire 5, which I could, we have traditionally said, okay, out of that 5%, we will split it between me and my firm. We'll say listing firm and selling firm. And we even go so detailed as to say how many percent for each, because that's also your seller's business to know and to have an input in. So you might say, hey, seller, well, the thing is, I'm spending a lot of money on all this stuff, so I feel like I should have more of a portion of that 5%. So instead of 2.5 each, I'm going to do 3 and 2. That's how I work. If the seller has a problem with that, they could voice it and you could negotiate if you want to, but I've seen this before. I've also seen 2.75. And then what would be the other one? 2.25. So some blend, some sort of mix, not necessarily even. Well, with this lawsuit, the parties feeling offended, feeling hurt, are saying it's not fair that the seller has to pay the buyer agent too. Pay your own agent, and then the buyer should pay their own agent. And while that might actually look reasonable on the surface, let's look at why that might present some challenges. Any of you who've bought houses before, you know that buying a house vicariously through HGTV is one thing, because you have an unlimited budget and you're watching somebody else. But in real life, you've got two main buckets of cash, of money to deal with. You've got to come up with a down payment. And you also have to pay some amount of closing costs. This is the one that buyers don't think about, who are especially first-time buyers, right? They're not thinking about, oh, wait a minute, it costs money to get a loan. How much is that? And it's a sizable chunk. The down payment is, of course, a sizable chunk, depending. What could the down payment be? Depending on the type of loan, as we will get into in 14 and 15, what sorts of amounts could we be talking about for down payment? That's good, Tara. That's a good agent. FaceTiming you doing a virtual walkthrough. That's great. There you go. LeVar got right down to it. You took all the answers. Good. We got right to it. Anywhere from 0 down and up, right? I've seen more than 20% down as well. But the key about 20, the reason LeVar said 20 specifically is because that's the magic number at which you don't have an extra nagging monthly fee called private mortgage insurance, which we'll get into later. So that's a big chunk. Even, well, 0, the thing about the 0 plans, which might be a USDA loan or a more commonly a VA loan, even some conventional loans, the thing about 0 down is they're going to charge you other fees. So there are still fees attached. You don't have a down payment requirement, but you have maybe higher closing costs because of that. So let's just say it's a typical conventional down payment amount of 5%. And on that $400,000 purchase price, if we're putting 5% down, how much are we borrowing in a percent of the purchase price? 5% of the purchase price will be the down payment. The amount being borrowed is what? $380,000, which means 5%. Oh my goodness, this is killing me. 5% down is another $20,000. $20,000 for a down payment. Closing costs on $380,000 could very well be 5 to 6%. So there's another $20,000. How many $20,000 does this buyer have? Now, for the closing cost one, we can do this little magic trick. It's not so magic. We can say, hey, seller, if we pay you, if you want us to pay you, if you're asked, well, we said the sale price is $400,000. If we could write it for $420,000 as a purchase price, with the seller paying $20,000 toward the buyer's closing costs, that would accomplish the goal of the buyer not having to bring $20,000. They're basically rolling it into the loan amount. They're financing it in. There's some requirements that would have to take place there. It would have to appraise for that higher amount. It would have to appraise for $420,000. So that might be a problem in and of itself. Now, if we add in this new development with the lawsuit, saying not only buyer are you going to have to come up with $20,000 for down payment and $20,000 for closing costs, but you're going to have to pay your own buyer agency commission. Oh, another 4, 5, 6%. Yet another $20,000. Oh, well, let's just roll that into the price too. Well, lenders have already come out and said, for now, no. And even if they allowed it, it would still have to probably appraise. For now, $440,000. How much more can it appraise for and still be a reasonable, logical valuation? So the plaintiffs are saying these buyer agent commissions are causing buyers to have to pay more money, and that money is adding onto the price of the house, and therefore it's inflating house prices artificially. So there's a lot of terms being thrown about. There's a lot of confusion. And it's the way it's going so far, it stands to change our disclosure requirements. I feel like it's not going to be the end of the world, but I think we're going to just have to do things differently and explain things differently. But for now, the important part for you to pass this course is that the way it's always been, that's what we're going to go with for now. Seller pays total commission, in this case, 5%. and it could be earned all completely by the listing firm, or it could be shared between the listing firm and the selling firm. But it's really just one more of those lists of things that the listing agent is going to be doing to try to find the buyer. And it's probably the most commonly effective one, the most popularly effective one. Sorry, yeah, that's it. That's all I had on that screen so far. I got a little lopsided. So as far as some math, let's talk about a little bit of that calculation math. What if on the problem it said that the selling agent, that's the broker involved, earned $4,500 on the sale in commissions. Let's just say in commissions. The split with their firm, meaning how much did they get to keep compared to giving the other portion to their firm, with their own firm is 50%. Or 50-50, meaning they keep 50 and they give their firm 50. The split between the two firms, the listing firm and selling firm split, is also 50-50. How much in total commission was earned? How much was the total commission before all these splits happened? So let me get that squished around a little bit so you can see it. And then I'll kind of give you a diagram. Sorry. Okay, there. So we start at the bottom. I found it, think about it like a Christmas tree, and we've got the total commission at the top. It goes down to a split between the listing firm and the selling firm. And then that goes down further to the split between the listing agent and their own firm compared to the selling agent and their own firm. So if we start that way, the selling agent is the one we're dealing with. They earned $4,500. $4,500. And we know that if they earned $4,500, how much did their firm earn? The selling firm got $4,500 and they have a 50-50 split with their firm. How much did their firm get too? Yeah, it was a 50-50 split. That means they both got $4,500. Does that make sense so far? And so if they both got $4,500, then how much was the entire selling firm commission, meaning the chunk given to this entire side? 9,000, right? 45 plus 45, 45 times 2. And so then next thing we learned was that the two firms had chosen to, well, the listing firm and seller chose to split evenly between the two firms. So if the selling firm got 9,000, then the listing firm did also. And so now it's just one more tiny little leap to the finish line. Add those two together, as someone already did there in the chat. Total commission was $18,000. Does that make sense? It's easy when we look at it with 50-50 splits. It's a little more confusing when the splits get different. 60-40, 80-20. But it's the same concept. Instead of just doubling this or adding this together, now we're going to have to do something a little different. Oh, by the way, if the total commission was $18,000 and the percent commission paid was 6%, at 6% commission, what was the sale price? Let me make this neater and go back to a nice clean page. If 18,000 is the total commission earned, 18,000 was the total. In dollars. And the commission total is 6%. What's the sale price? This one is going to go back to a strategy we used when we did Seller Net. Did we do Seller Net yet? I don't remember. We may not have done it yet. Okay, good. The way we do this is to write our own little word problem. We're going to say $18,000 is what percent of the sales price? Well, we know the 18,000 because it's in here. We got to it. We worked our way up to it. What's the percent of the sale price that the $18,000 is? Whose cut is that? Is that the agent's cut or the seller's cut? It's the seller. It's the agent's portion, right? And the agent's portion is the 6%. 18,000 is 6% of the sale price that we're trying to figure out. So if we now replace the word is with a division symbol and the word of with an equals symbol, we have ourselves a nice little math problem we know exactly what to do with. 18,000 divided by 6% is going to give you that sale price. $300,000. That makes sense? That last step doesn't have to make 100% sense. Just remember that that's the procedure. That's the step we do. 18,000 is 6% of sale price. Replace is with a division. Now you know what to plug in the calculator, and you know you got it wrong if this number is not bigger than this number. So what if we messed up? What if we said 18,000 instead of 6%? What if we said 94%? Because that's how much the seller's getting, right? The agents are getting 6% of the purchase price. The seller's keeping 94%. And later, when we do that seller net problem, we're going to use the 94. So if you mix up the two and we do 18,000 divided by 94%, we'll know in a hurry that $19,148 doesn't make any sense for that sale price to be. So you can kind of self-check it just because it doesn't make any sense. Here, let me, I just realized I wasn't showing you the calculator. There we go. Yeah, 19,148 couldn't be the sale price. So you might see that. You might see that as a problem. How much is one of the agents getting, or the firm? What are the splits between the two? Let's do it a little more challenging. And this time we'll say, the listing agent, let's make it interesting, got $18,000 all to themselves. Their split between them and their firm is 80-20, which means the listing agent's keeping 80%, the firm's keeping 20%. The split between firms is, we'll keep that simple. We'll go 50-50 on that one. And then the total commission 5%. So 2 questions. How much is that in dollars? And what is the sale price? That's what we just did, except we had pretty simple splits involved. So if we take it graphically, we go down here to this listing agent. Let's see if I can fit that on the screen. Listing agent down in the lower corner. They got $18,000 all to themselves. And they split that with their firm. So their portion was 80%. The firm's portion was 20%. We need to figure out how much this total amount was for the whole listing firm side. And we do that with that little technique I just showed you. So $18,000 is 80% of what? Place the is with a division. 18,000 divided by 80%. $22,500 is how much the listing firm side is getting. Now, I was being nice, and I said the split between firms is 50-50, so we automatically know that the other side also got $22,500. But if I wasn't being so nice, and if I had said the split between firms was 60-40, we would just do the same technique. We would say $22,500 is 60% of what? And we just plug it in. But we're going to stick with the 50-50 original problem. And if both are $22,500, then the total is $45,000. 22,500 times 2 in dollars. Now we need to figure out what is the purchase price. What do we need to know? We have 45,000 is the total in dollars, and we need to know the purchase price. What other figure do we need to make this happen out of the problem itself? The given information. Yeah, this one up here. The total commission as a percentage. So let me make a little room here. I'll get rid of these. And we'll just plug in that little, create our own little word problem again. $45,000 is 5% of what? 45,000 divided by 5%. That's a $900,000 purchase price. Does that help? If I get my head out of the way? Make sense? That's something very practical in real life, because we're going to use that in a problem called seller net, which we get to in chapter 8 now that I think about it. So let's go ahead and do it. Another very real world question the seller's going to ask is, this is all great. I appreciate that you're going to do the open house, Victor, and the social media marketing and your network, and that's why we're hiring you. But here's a seller talking to Victor. They say, Victor, we need $80,000 for our down payment on the next house. We got to end up with $80,000 from the sale of this house. I don't care what you cost. I don't care what the costs are, long as we walk away with $80,000. So you, or Victor, as the professional, is going to say, well, you've got a couple of fees involved, right? I'm looking through your house and it's a wreck. He might be nicer than me. It needs a lot of work. And I feel like in this market, you're going to need to spend about $3,000 for repairs just to get it ready to put on the market. All these things are very flexible, very dependent on the situation, by the way, guys. For the test problem, they could throw these sorts of things at you. The loan balance, Mr. Seller, that you've told me you still owe on your house is $630,000. So you've got to pay that lender from your proceeds. So we're going to have to get at least $80,000 that you want left over, $3,000 for repairs that you got to be able to spend, $630 to pay off your current loan. Some closing costs that you as a seller are going to have to pay, and I'm going to estimate those to be $5,000. And then I'm worth it. I'm a very knowledgeable and valuable agent, Victor says, so I'm charging you 6.5% commission because that's what I charge. How much are you going to have to sell this house for to be able to pay all of those items and enable the seller to walk away with $80,000 when it's all said and done? Take a moment, see what you can do with that, and then and just I'll give you a hint. It's going to involve writing that little is something percent of sale price technique we did earlier. Take your time. Closing costs. The seller has to pay some closing costs. That might be excise tax. That might be deed preparation. There's a handful of things that the attorney has to do and that the seller has to pay in order to sell their house. How we doing? You probably added up the dollars. Then you said 3,000 plus 630 plus 5,000. And what is that? 630 to 638? Oh, don't forget the 80. I forgot the 80. Plus 80. $718. And then you thought, wait a minute, this isn't a dollar amount. What do I do with this percentage? What's the next step? If the dollars given in the problem add up to $718,000, and then the only expense left for that seller to have to pay out is your pesky commission, what do we do? That is a great guess. And you are in good company because everybody tries that. Yana says multiply by 6.5%. In other words, let's figure out what 6.5% of 718,000 is. Let's try that. That is $46,670. And so if you add that onto the 718, the property would have to sell for $764,670. But there's a small problem. You just cheated yourself out of a couple $1,000s in commission. Because you, in that case, and you and everybody else, don't feel bad. When you calculate 6.5% of this number, that's not the sale price. The sale price is a higher number that we don't know yet. That's what we're trying to figure out. And so you want 6.5% of the sale price. You calculated 6.5% of the net before your commission was taken out. So let's do it the right way and see how much we would cost ourselves if we did that step improperly. I'm going to leave this here as a reference. And let's take a look. We're going to take that 718, and we know that 718,000, which, remember, is all of this stuff, all those dollars amounts that we can add up. One more thing. That 6.5% commission, that's another split itself, isn't it? That's a split between you and the seller. And so if you, the agent, are getting 6.5% and the total commission percentage is 100, then what's the percent left that the seller will be left with? 100% minus 6.5. The seller's going to be left with 93.5%. So it's sort of like how when you talk about a split with your firm, it might be 80-20. The split with the seller is 93.5, 6.5. Because you're taking 6.5% of the sale price and they end up with 93.5% of the sale price as the seller. Does that make logical sense? And so I say that, I put you through that to say this. We need to know what the seller's portion of the commission, the sale price is in a percent. 718,000 down here is 93.5% of what? Same strategy as what we did just a minute ago. Plug in a division symbol for the is, and there's the 718 divided by 93.5%. So it needs to sell for $767,914 in order for you to get 6.5%, and then the seller to be able to pay all of these things and walk away with $80,000. So it's this one little magic last step that you need to remember. Now, let's compare that to what you were willing to take if we had done the math the wrong way. How much is your commission on 767,914? 6.5% commission is 49,914. We were gonna settle for 46,670 if we had taken that commission based on that net number of 718 instead, costing ourselves $3,200. So we want to get this math right, don't we? Don't promise that first try to the seller, and then they say, "Wait, you said total commission was going to be 46.6. No, I made a mistake on the math. It's going to be 49.9. That's going to be harder to convince them to go back to, right? So we can do another one, and then it'll lock in. But that's a very real world and also potential test question you could see. Seller net problem. How much will the seller net? In order to net 80,000, how much does it have to sell for? Let's do another one. This time we've got a seller that needs $150,000 to walk away with so they can go buy their next house. That's the down payment on the next house. They have a loan payoff to pay off their existing mortgage of $790,000. They've got some closing costs of $15,500. They've got some repairs needed, maybe a home warranty that you're advising them to put on the house to make it more attractive because it's an older house and maybe buyers are scared of the condition it's in. But if you have a 1-year warranty, they maybe won't be so scared. Let's say $7,000. It's a dump. It needs a lot of work. And then your commission is 6%, meaning the total that you're going to share potentially with a buyer agent. How much would they need to sell for in order for all these things to get accomplished, paid for? That probably went a little faster for you. You added up the dollars first, every single one of them. Now, on the test problem, there is a chance they could add into the test problem some decoy number that you're going to have to realize is not a seller expense, but they probably keep it pretty straightforward. If we add up all of these dollars, we've got $150,000 plus $790 plus $15,500 plus $7, $962,500. And that's before your piece. Don't want to forget your part. So if your part is 6% commission, how much is the seller left with as a percentage of the sale price? $100 minus 6. Seller's portion is 94. Right? Now we have everything we need. 962.5 divided by 94% equals that sale price. Of $1,023,936. Needs to sell for $1,023,936. In order to pay you your part, in order to pay off those various expenses and leave them with $150,000 when it's all said and done. Better? We'll get to that in the slides in a little bit. Let's go to the slides now. We left off with Chapter 8, Unit 8. And our recall in this is the actual laws affecting solicitation, some contracts. We're going to look at the contracts involved, the MLS, antitrust laws, and then those are level 1 and 2. The level 3 is some math. Earning a real estate brokerage fee, which we were already started to talk about. General requirements for agency contracts. You need to know what must be in all agency agreements, like an expiration date. That's one of them. Listing contracts and practices, buyer agent contracts and practices. So applying the stuff we learned in 7 to the real world and looking at some forms, documents that are involved in that. So here's the basics of what every agency agreement must have in it. According to North Carolina Commission Rule 104, A104, if you were to look that up in the rules PDF, you'd find this in a much more drawn-out, legal-sounding type of verbiage. But all agency agreements need to be signed by everybody. Who's signing the agency agreements? Who is the all parties they're talking about? Is it buyer and seller? That doesn't make sense. Buyer and seller's not around yet. One of them, but not the other one. Yeah. It's the firm, who is also known as the agent, and the either or. Buyer, seller, landlord, tenant, whatever the situation is. Because don't forget, agency agreements aren't always about listing agreements and buyer agency agreements. They could be a property management agreement as well as a tenant representation agreement. So they need to be signed between the firm and that principal client person. Does that mean the broker in charge of the firm needs to sign this agency agreement? Or is there something you remember about us as broker humans being general agents, having the authority and permission to sign on behalf of our firm? That's who can sign these things. You don't need to get your BIC signature on these. They don't want to take the time to do that. Can you imagine if you're a BIC of 200 people and that's your day, is just going down through and signing listing and buyer agency agreements? No. They give us that permission, that authority to do it because we are a general agent on behalf of our firm. So it's going to be signed by us. Victor's going to sign it. He's the listing agent working for ABC Listing Firm on their behalf. So he'll sign it and the seller will sign that listing agreement, or the buyer will sign that buyer agency agreement. What if he screws up? He never will. I have full faith and confidence that will never be a problem. But if he did, they're going to want to have a number, an agent license number attached to that listing agreement or agency agreement so they can track him down and see that he really is an agent for that matter. The consumer needs to be able to look him up if they want to, although I doubt anybody ever does. But if things go wrong, need to be able to see, is he even licensed? So broker's license number is needed. And when you look on the listing agreement or the buyer agency agreement, any of these things, there's a place for both the firm's license number and the broker human's license number. But the test is just going to test you that the broker needs to have theirs on there. In real life, both are on there. But bare bones minimum, according to rule, signed by all parties, include the broker's license number, have a definite termination date. You can't just, I wish you could. I wish I could sign a listing with one person one time and they have to use me for everything they ever sell. But I got to earn it every time. And then number 4, have that very bold and obvious language saying we don't care what anybody looks like, believes in, where they came from. We're going to treat them all fairly. Everybody deserves an equal shot at real estate. The fair housing, non-discrimination language must be in all agency agreements. So those are the 4 main ones. There's plenty of others because I think the buyer agency agreement is about 8 pages. The listing agreement probably close to the same, maybe 12. So there's a lot more information than just these 4 things, but these are by Real Estate Commission rule what all of agency agreements must contain. You could have more things in here. If your firm wanted to add extra provisions and have an attorney draw that up and modify, It at least has to have this stuff, but it could also have more stuff too. Here's where those things fit. Must include signatures of the parties. And it might be how many? How many parties could we be talking about on the client side? How many client signatures could there be? One seller? Two sellers? I sold a house one time. It was a friend of my brother's from school, and her dad passed away. And so she called and said, hey, my dad died. His house needs to get sold. Can you help us? And I said, absolutely. Who is us? Because it was her 3 adult sisters, and their 12-year-old brother. How many signatures did I need on that listing agreement? Actually, you're right. In this case, I did need 5, but my initial answer to that question would have been this guy again, because what if each of those sisters were married? Now, how many would I need? 4 sisters, all with spouses. 4 times 2 is 8, plus the underage brother, his guardian on his behalf. I would have needed 9 signatures. Guess what? There's one line for seller signatures on the listing agreement. And so there's an addendum for that, an additional signatures addendum when you have a whole bunch of other signatures needed. You need to get their signatures too, because you don't want to do all this work on a listing, all that stuff, because 3 out of the 7 are on board, but the other ones didn't even know they were trying to do this thing, and you don't find that out until closing week. In which case they say, oh, we don't want to sell. You did all this for nothing. Let's don't put ourselves in that position. Let's get everybody on board in writing up front, because they all would need to sign those final documents at closing. Otherwise, you wasted your time. So we need to find out who those owners are so we know how many people need to sign. With buyer agency, it's not as common of a situation as that, but you certainly need to know who's involved with this buying decision. Who's buying it? I had one, and I started out with she was probably about 20, 25 at the time, a girlfriend of a friend and first time buyer. And so we went through all kinds of houses and condos. She just wasn't sure. And I literally showed her 90 houses by the time it was all done. That is not the norm. And if I said this to a room of other brokers, they would laugh at me and make fun of me. However, here's the thing about that. The reason that happened is she didn't know what area she wanted, what type of property she wanted. She was a first-time buyer, and also she had that personality of being a detailed person. That enters into the picture. I could have pulled the plug and said, I've shown you 20 houses. You haven't picked one. I'm out of here. But I would have walked away from those 8 or 10, 12 hours I would have spent at that point. And you have to make a business decision. Am I going to stick this out or not? Am I playing the short game of making a commission on this one sale, or am I playing the long game of developing and maintaining a relationship with somebody? So we looked at about 30 houses, because she was going from Lake Norman condos of 1,000 square feet to downtown Concord historic bungalows of 1,500 square feet. Similar price points, University area, Northeast Charlotte, Lake, Concord, Kannapolis. It took some time for her to get educated on what there is to pick from out there. And that's not for everybody. Many agents would have walked away. And then here's the thing. She never was happy with any of them. And then along comes her mother. She started coming with us, looked at a few. And then the mom said, you know what? She just really wants that extra space, that extra room. Let's bump up the price by $50,000. I'll help her with the down payment. And while I was very thankful, we started from scratch at that point. Because I'm like, okay, well, now at least she'll find stuff she can afford that she likes. Because we figured out she liked something out of her ability. Here comes an influx of a little extra cash, and now we're back to the drawing board. But at least now in an end in sight. But we started from scratch. Had to show higher price points of all those same areas, right? And by the time it was all said and done, it was up around that 90 range, and she bought it. She bought, this is always the funny part. She ended up buying one of the first ones we looked at. So she bought that townhouse. 3 years later, she called and said, I want to sell it and buy a house, like a single family. Guess what? How many did she look at that time? 3. I paid my dues the first time. She came at me this time educated. She already did her research. I only had to show her 3 houses. She picked one. So that was the original purchase of the townhouse, the sale of the townhouse, the purchase of the single family. 3 years later, she called again. I want to sell that and buy a historic house in Mooresville. Now we're up to 5, and that's where she still lives. 5 transactions. And on that Mooresville house, 1. That was the only one we looked at because she already knew what she wanted. So now instead of 90 houses for one client, it was 90 houses over 5 sales. And so 90 divided by 5 is 18 showings a piece if you average it out. And that's still kind of highish, but if you average it out over the dollars earned, I was cool with that, right? So it's a long game, is my point. Been real easy for me, and I was frustrated. I was like, at what point do I cut bait and just give up on this person? But I stuck it out, and I could have not. And that would have been okay too. You've got to know your worth. And if you have nothing else going on, why not? Especially in the early years, stick it out because you don't know who they know. And they have a pretty good network of friends, and maybe I would be the guy they'd recommend to the friends too. Right? So it is definitely a relationship long game. Agency agreements need to include the license number. They also, we're at our break, and they need to have this expiration date. And these are all excerpts from the actual agency agreements. And then the fair housing language, and also this little symbol, which, by the way, if someone ever gets in trouble violating a fair housing law or suspected of it, in the investigation, the commission or maybe the Realtor Association is going to say, have you been displaying the Equal Housing Opportunity logo, this thing that's getting circled here, on your business cards, signs, website, telling the world that you will adhere to this? Very important fair housing rules and laws and paragraph. And if this doesn't appear on any of your stuff, that's just going to be one more sort of nail in the coffin. You want to make sure that you are showing and telling the world all this stuff you're supposed to. And this is the language that needs to be in all those agency agreements. Firm shall conduct all activities regarding this agreement without respect to the 7 protected classes: race, color, religion, sex, national origin, handicap. New word's going to swap that out for disability, probably, if it hasn't already, or familial status of any party or prospect. Also, if you're a realtor, you have an additional ethical duty to conduct activities without respect to sexual orientation, gender identity. And then as far as these original classes, I think I mentioned this before, sex category, which historically used to, as of 70s when it came about, we'll learn about that in chapter 19, was historically male-female. Don't treat males different than females, vice versa. Now that encompasses those sexual orientation, gender identity categories too. So we're well covered. Treat everybody fairly and equally. We come back from break, we'll talk about some more of this stuff. I'll see you back in 10. Okay, let's come back together. Okay, why do we need to use a listing agreement? What's the point of it? Who does it benefit the most, the seller or the broker? It's right there staring you in the face. I won't drag this out. If that seller could do this, if the seller was allowed to, you better believe they would say, hey, just trust me. Give it a shot. We don't need to put anything in writing. They're not allowed to. It is illegal for us to do any listing activity without something in writing, an actual listing agreement. In fact, I've had occasionally sellers say, hey, go ahead and put the sign in the yard. I don't have time for the paperwork. Let's do that later, but let's go ahead and get started, get it in the MLS. And I have to respectfully decline, because while I do have to obey their orders, it's the lawful ones, and that's not a lawful one. Hey, seller, I'm sorry. I wish I could. I really don't. But I can't. I'm not allowed to do any listing activity without a listing agreement in writing. See, it says so right here. And then show them on the listing agreement where it says that, because it does. But we want that, because if we don't have that, then what's to stop them from hiring somebody else, right? And we are out. So we're being hired to market their property and to try to procure or find buyers. In fact, that listing agreement doesn't say anywhere that we guarantee to sell it. It's just saying we're going to try really hard. We're going to try our best, and then we would show them maybe a marketing plan as to how we're going to try it. So yeah, we have to have it because it's required. And if the seller could get away with it, they sure wouldn't. Something else that affects the way we behave goes back to the realtor code of ethics. So keep in mind, the things that we're talking about in this course mostly are the laws and rules required by the Real Estate Commission. But we also, if we're a member of the Realtor Association, we are required to adhere to their rules too. And so their main book of rules is called the Code of Ethics. The Realtor Code of Ethics says in Article 16, it's a pretty sizable document, by the way, that we can't steal other people's business. We can't be sleazy and try to poach other people's current clients. The big fancy legal term is tortious interference with contractual relations. Somebody has a contractual relation with another agent, you can't interfere with that. What could that look like? Well, what if you're good buddies with your neighbor down the street, and that neighbor has the gall to, to list their house with somebody other than you, and you just had a cookout with them. They know that you're in the business, but they hired somebody else. You can't go to their house, knock on the door and say, hey, what's wrong with you? You know, I just got my license. You go fire that agent you hired right now and hire me like you should have done to begin with. Right? Obvious. That's not going to work. Any sort of, and I saw one on a reality TV show one time, which of all places is not something you're going to get truth from, but the agent was getting her license back and her daughter had listed with someone else. And she literally said on the air, on the show, you go cancel that listing agreement with that agent and use me because you know you should have done it to begin with. And I thought, is anybody ever going to turn her in? I'm not, but you know, you got to be careful. And we want that. We want to elevate that level of professionalism. There are some who try, but they could jeopardize their membership in the their realtor membership. Sorry, guys. I have to do a little enforcement real quick. Okay. The do not call rules. Anybody get spam calls, especially this time of year or just all the time? I still get them. Who's on the do not call registry? Anybody have and do you still get them? You get calls? I do. Well, it applies to us too. The do not call list applies to real estate agents too. And there's some guidelines that they want you to know. You are allowed to call people on the do not call list in these two situations. You are allowed to call do not call registry people if you have helped them in the last 18 months with a purchase. So if they're a past client over the last 18 months, then yes, you can still call them. Now, that is just straight up cold calling they're talking about. Because in this business, I would say if you haven't established a good enough relationship for them to not be mad about you calling them, and it's not that you're just calling them as a random stranger anymore, you actually did a transaction with them. That's a bit different. So, but the rule is this, and keep in mind the do not call rules apply to all sales. We're just talking about the ones for real estate. But it's a big difference between helping somebody buy a cell phone for 10 minutes and helping somebody buy a house, which literally takes 30, 40, 60 days. You're making a relationship, and it's okay to call your friend. And at that point, they're your friend. But you will be tested on this way. How long can you call the person on the do not call list? And it's not a violation. The answer to that is 18 months. Sorry, guys. Okay. And then the other one is this: 3 months from the last time they made an inquiry. So it might look like this for real estate. They go to your website. They see a listing on your website and they fill out a form you've set up for more information or any sort of a customer or consumer inquiry. Then you can contact them for 3 months after they've made that consumer inquiry. So those are the two times when you can actually call people who are on the do not call list. What you all cannot do is if a for sale by owner seller is on the do not call list, you can't call them if what you're trying to do is sneak attack a listing appointment on them. If you legitimately have a buyer that might want to buy their for sale by owner house, then yes, you can call them even if they're on the do not call list because they've put a sign out there. They've put it out there that they want to sell their house. And you at least need to call them to find out if they're willing to work with a real estate broker. But a lot of agents call them with no buyer in sight. They don't really have a buyer. They're calling that seller to establish a relationship and maybe win them over. So when they give up trying to sell it on their own, they'll maybe hire them. And that's what's not allowed if that for sale by owner seller is on the do not call registry list. That makes sense? And then the last one, no listings held by any firms that are in active status ever. So you can't call somebody by phone who you know is already listed for sale with someone else. Not allowed. Regardless of their do not call status. You shouldn't be proactively seeking out people who have already listed for sale and try to get them to fire their person and hire you. Pretty expensive fines for this do not call list. I believe it's up to like $40,000 in some cases if you get caught. The question is, prove it. Did you get a recording of it? And it's a whole process, but it's pretty risky. And there are plenty of people who make cold calls and they just risk it. And they call the do not call list as well. And they're just gambling that they're not going to get busted. Good question. Who finds you? The do not call list is the Federal Trade Commission, FTC. That's who's overseeing that list. Keep in mind, it's calls that you're not allowed to make. Do not call list. There is no do not mail list or do not door knock list or do not email list. You can use these methods and not worry about who you're not allowed to reach out in these ways. It's just a phone calls that the do not call list is pertaining to. But wouldn't you know it, the government who has written these laws gave themselves a pass, and they said, sure, use our U.S. Postal Service, pay us hundreds of thousands of dollars to mail out postcards with no limit. We don't care. We would love for you to, but you better not make phone calls to people that don't want you to. And I'm glad that list exists. I'm just kidding. And then there's no do not door knock list unless there might be a no solicitation sign. I don't see a lot of people fighting and just itching to go out there knocking on doors, although we are back to that. There are plenty of agents who are so desperate to beat out the competition and win the client before the competitors do that they're willing to door knock. And it's a valid way, but just be careful. You know, you're on somebody's property. People have different feelings about things. There's security, there's animals, there's weapons, and just use caution, but there's no rule or law against it. Some people would probably knock even with the no solicitation sign there, but inadvisable. But there is no do not knock list like a do not call list. And then finally for email, you might round up an email list or make one yourself with your website. People inquiring about property, giving their email addresses. You might over time build up a several dozens or hundreds or 1,000 person email list and send out to them. There's no requirement that keeps you from doing that. But what is there when it comes to email? There is one rule about email that you do have to give people a way to deal with that email. It's not a list that says you're not allowed to email to them, but you have to provide something in the email called an opt-out or an unsubscribe. So you have to give them the ability to opt out. On the test, I don't know if they're going to be so antiquated that they refer to faxes, but faxes are handled the same way. Faxes and emails, some of you might have said, just thought, what does he mean, faxes? What is this thing, fax you speak of? I want to forget about it too, because it was terrible. I hate a fax machine. It was awful. I guess at the time it served a purpose, but nobody ever had one that worked. The client's fax machine was always broken, and you had to drive to their house anyway. So I'm glad we're past those days. But whether faxing or emailing, you got to give them an opt-out. Let me catch up in the chat here. Someone's already working with a broker but wants to switch. Great question. Good question. So if they're already listed with a firm and they're tired of it, they just think this person's not doing what they promised, I want to hire her. Then if they reach out to you, you are, in fact, allowed to go talk to them. You can go on a listing appointment. It's just that you can't solicit them. They can basically solicit you. You can't solicit them. But you are allowed to go there and do a full-fledged listing appointment with them because they asked you. because they're now. Here's the thing about that. You're going to want to ask some important questions like, when does your current listing agreement expire? Because if they're tired of their agent 3 days into a 6-month contract, it may not do you much good if that agent chooses to, or that agent's firm chooses to hold them to that entire 6-month contract, right? You're going to want to find out how much time is left, or will that agent's firm let them out early before you can do anything? You can't do anything if they're still tied down to that listing agreement. But it might be most of the time they're talking to you is because it's got maybe another day or two left and they're about to expire, and they want to seek other methods at that point. Okay, here's a big one. Can you pay agents from other states a commission? Can you pay them a referral fee? Can you, once you're licensed and someone comes from North Dakota and they call you, an agent from North Dakota, hey, I got a friend who's coming to North Carolina. If they use you for buying, would you pay me a referral fee? Your answer is yes. If you have an active license, I'll be glad to. Done. That is okay. But if they go on to say, great, so I'm going to book the plane tickets for us, and she and I are going to fly to North Carolina together, and I'm going to ride in the back of the car while you show her houses, and I'm going to give her North Dakota real estate advice because I'm an agent in North Dakota. You're going to have to say, great, have safe travels, can't wait to meet you, but now I can't pay you a referral fee. Here's the rule. You cannot pay a referral fee to out-of-state brokers if they come here with the client, because they're not a North Carolina broker. And you and I both know they're not going to keep their mouth shut. There's no way they can keep from giving real estate advice. Problem is, they're in North Carolina giving real estate advice that they're only authorized to give as pertains to North Dakota. You with me? Some teachers, some instructors online that you might run across go to great lengths to really make this elaborate and dramatic. And they'll say, if they even step foot across the border, then you can't pay them the fee. If they send their grandma to North Carolina and don't come with her, and you show her houses all day on Saturday, she gets back to the hotel, I'm pretty sure she's going to call them and talk to them. And there's not a thing you can do about it. Nor do you have to. You're not required to. You can't control who they talk to, who grandma calls. It's just that if you know about it, and if they certainly can't accompany you and engage in real estate advice in a state where they have no license to do so. So if they have an active license in their state of residence, stay home. You're referring it to me because you should be able to trust me to do a good job. And in order for me to pay you that referral fee, you got to stay home. What if the reason they want to make that referral fee from you is they're just going to turn around and give it to their friend or give it to their grandma? Would you do that maybe? If you were a close enough friend or relative, you'd say, hey, use this agent over here. Let me get the referral fee from the agent and I'll give it to you. I could see that happening. Well, we could do it a different way. If that's what their goal is, if their goal is to turn it over to the customer anyway, then instead of this rule, we could just ignore this rule. And, well, let me say it this way. We can adhere to this rule while still accomplishing that goal. Because instead of paying a referral fee to that out-of-state agent, we can just give a discount or a rebate to the client directly. And we can say, hey, you're going to send her my way. Instead of me paying you a referral fee, if you're just going to route it over to them anyway, I can't pay you a referral fee if you want to come here with grandma. And I usually will make that example. Maybe it's just in Virginia or South Carolina and they want to drive grandma a couple hours to see you and show houses. And I get that. I'm not trying to make grandma be lonely, but I can't pay you a referral fee. And so the way we can fix that is you were going to give it to grandma anyway. Let me just rebate directly to her for my commission. So just watch out for that on the test question. They can't, if they get paid a referral fee, they got to stay home in their home state. There are several items with regard to the Sherman antitrust laws. Sherman Antitrust protects consumers, and the Federal Trade Commission enforces it as well. And they prevent monopolies, for one thing. That's one of the ways, that's one of the things the Sherman Antitrust laws exist to do, is to keep real estate firms from dominating an area and making it so the consumer only has one or two to pick from. Everybody should have choices, and you can't set yourself up as a big, giant real estate firm and try to get rid of the little guys in the business so that the consumer don't have them to pick from, or doesn't have them to pick from either. Preventing monopolies, that limit competition. One of the things they can't do is this: set fees or commissions. Price fixing, that's something that agents are getting wrong all the time. I see it on Facebook, I see it in the news, and people say that magical phrase, that terrible phrase, the standard commission rate is 6%. Wrong. I know I'm talking to an amateur or somebody who doesn't know the rules when I hear that phrase. And the consumer doesn't know the difference, so that's okay. But if you're an agent on an agent forum on Facebook and you're saying, yeah, the standard here in Maryland is 6, I'm thinking, Sherman Antitrust is national. That's not North Carolina only. And you just overstepped. You said something wrong. I'm probably not going to comment to them about it and be that know-it-all jerk, but I'm just thinking, probably not going to refer to you because you don't like referral business because you don't even know the rules. We can't say there's a standard commission rate. It's not allowed, because while it might be a rate that a lot of people seem to charge, there's no standard. All commissions are negotiable. And that's how we have to answer it when the consumer asks us. If you go on a listing appointment, the seller says, so what do you charge, like the standard 6? You would say, well, as a matter of fact, there is no standard. What I charge is what I charge because I choose to charge it, and it is this, and it's whatever you want. You could say that your own personal standard rate is 6 or 5 or 4 or whatever. So you could choose, and you could call it your standard. I'd probably stay away from the word in general, just on principle. You could also say my firm charges this percentage. The firm can pick. You join a firm, they could say, okay, here are the rules. In our policy and procedures manual, page 13, you'll see right here that we charge no less than 5.5%, period, ever. If you want to negotiate lower than that, you're going to have to pay for it out of your split. They might let you charge less than a certain amount, but they're going to give you less on your split versus their split will be based on the 6 or whatever their minimum is that they've chosen to put in the rules. But you're going to have to take the hit. So a firm can set their commission rate. You can set your commission rate, but we can't refer to the commission rate as a standard across all firms in the market. So price fixing includes fees, commissions, any sort of group, realtor association, a group of firms. It couldn't be like the top 3 biggest firms get together and say, hey, let's all agree not to go below 5. So as to keep our commissions at a certain level, let's just get together. There's thousands of us represented by us 3 firms. Let's set the tone and we will set it. That harms consumers. Consumers should have the ability to negotiate and shop, basically. If they can't force them to shop or force them not to have options. A group of brokers can't do it. A group of firms can't do it. Associations can't do it. The MLS can't say you must charge this. In fact, that's part of what these lawsuits are about too. That's one of the results of these lawsuits is MLSs are starting to say they used to have a minimum. MLSs used to say you must at least give the buyer's agent $1, some amount, at least an X amount. And now they're starting to say it could be anything. It could even be nothing. And the future potential outcome might say that MLSs can't dictate any. The listing agent can't share the commission at all. It's going to have to be paid straight from the seller to the buyer agent instead of the seller to the listing agent to the buyer agent. So a lot of changes potentially. But for now, this is the one you need to know. No such thing as a standard. Each firm sets their own rate. All commissions are negotiable. Sometimes the answer is, no, I won't negotiate down. I've had them ask me, there are some firms that charge like a 1% commission. You ever seen that out there in the world? They say, we charge 1%. You might hear them referred to as a discount brokerage model, but the commission doesn't like that term. Real estate commission says, don't call them a discount brokerage because now you're implying that there's a standard they're discounting off of. Better word for that is a limited service brokerage. They're giving you less. They're itemizing things. They're saying, okay, if all you want is to go on the MLS, then it costs 1% to do that. Oh, you want pictures too? Well, then that's going to be another 0.5% or another $500. They're basically menu of services kind of a thing with a limited service brokerage model. And sometimes they might call you out there and the seller says, I'm deciding between anybody who's willing to do it for 4 or 4.5%. If you're charging more than that, then I won't list with you. And it's okay for you to say, well, thanks for your time. I can't do it for that. That is not the service I provide. I provide full service, and therefore this isn't going to work for me. Or you could choose to go along with it. Your choice, as long as your firm supports you in that. Boycotting, you can't get together as a group of firms and say, hey, you know that firm over there, ABC Realty, they always pay us when we're buyer agents. They pay us less than half of the total, and we're sick of it. Let's all agree never to show their listings. You can't band together and boycott to not show another firm's listings, or if it's a home inspector. You know, this home inspector, ABC Home Inspections, they always write very detailed reports, and it just scares the buyer away, and the buyer always walks away, and we're sick of that. They should write more fair reports. Let's just band together as 2 or 3 companies and never hire them. Let's agree to never hire them. Again, you're hurting the consumer by limiting their choices, their options. So that falls under Sherman Antitrust, prohibiting boycotting. And then this one, firm A, B, C, and D get together. That's actually a map of Charlotte, and saying, hey, firm B, you get the northeast, firm C gets the southeast, A gets the northwest, and D gets the southwest, and we'll stay out of each other's territory. As big firms in the area, A will not go into area B. You do your thing there. But again, harming the consumer, because now the consumer only has to pick from that firm that's serving their territory, and this is not allowed. Can't split up, divide up markets, forcing consumers to choose between or choose a certain company only. Violating the Sherman antitrust laws can result in a $100,000 fine for an individual or $1 million fine for a corporation. It could even result in prison time, guys. 3 years prison time. Sherman antitrust violations. Yeah. Not just simple topics we're talking about here. This is big stuff. How do we earn the real estate brokerage fee? It's in the listing agreement. In this case, we're looking at the excerpt from the listing agreement, and it says that the seller is going to pay the firm a total fee of blank percent based on the sale price, or fill in the blank. So you could choose a percentage of sale price, or you could ignore that line and do like a flat fee. Sellers could say, I don't care how much it sells for. I don't think it's fair for me to pay a percentage of the sale price, but I will pay $5,000 flat. It's all negotiable. You're willing to do it. They're willing to do it. That's fine. This is where you put it. But notice they might test you on this. The compensation is outlined in the listing agreement, not the offer to purchase. The offer to purchase is between who? What parties is that between? Who's that between, the offer to purchase? The offer to purchase and contract. Joseph says the buyer and the seller. Yeah, the parties to the contract, buyer and seller, not a firm, not an agent at all. The offer to purchase and contract is the buyer buying from the seller. And so compensation is not allowed to be in that document at all right now. That might change later, not for your purposes for this test, but that might be another result of this lawsuit is we might have to change our real estate license law to allow for compensation to be mentioned in the contract. But for right now, your test will test you saying not allowed, specifically not allowed. When I got one this year, I got an offer from an agent, and she didn't like, I might have mentioned this, she didn't like that I was paying 2.5% buyer agency fee, or my seller was. She put in the offer, this offer contingent on buyer agent getting 3% instead of 2.5%. And that is a blatant violation of this rule. That is flat out not allowed. She did it wrong. She should not have put it in the offer to purchase, which becomes ultimately the contract. She should have called me ahead of time and said, any chance your seller would pay me 3 instead of 2.5? It should not have been a part of the contract. It should have been handled earlier. And if she wanted the extra 0.5%, she should have also talked to her buyer and said, hey, buyer, when I'm working as a buyer agent, my fee is 3%. This particular seller of the house you like is only paying 2.5%. So I'm going to need 0.5% to come from you, my client, the buyer. That is listed in the buyer agency agreement. It's spelled out in that agreement that that's how this works. If you don't like the commission offered by the seller, ask your buyer for it. When the buyer signs the buyer agency agreement, they're signing up for that. They're agreeing to that. And I have a feeling most agents don't spell that out and explain it properly. I bet if you polled 100 buyers, they wouldn't imagine that that's the way it truly works in North Carolina. And that's part of why we're dealing with this lawsuit stuff, is because we brokers have not been disclosing this stuff right completely. The difference between when we've actually earned the commission and when we actually receive the check is indeed a difference of several days or weeks. When we get paid is not the same as when we earn it. Did we talk about that before? I feel like I've seen that with you guys recently. When we've earned it is the point at which we've procured a certain kind of buyer, a ready, willing, and able buyer. So as a listing agent, an offer comes in. Have you just procured a ready, willing, and able buyer? Have you caused it so that an offer came in? Well, you got an offer. Clearly they're ready and willing. But the question is, are they truly able yet? Because you're going to have to ask, if this whole thing fell apart, the seller just changed their mind and didn't want to sell anymore, and you wanted to sue your seller for your commission, you'd have to prove that you produced a ready, willing, and able buyer in court. The judge is going to say, well, were they ready and willing? And you're going to say, yeah, they brought me an offer and the seller agreed to it. But were they able? And then you're going to have to think, was it a cash offer? If it was, then yeah, they were able as long as they had the cash. But if it's like 90% of buyers, if it was a loan and they had not yet been approved to get the loan, then no, they were not yet able. Ready and willing, yes, but we didn't have loan approval yet. So the judge would probably say, you didn't quite get there. So you don't have grounds to get your commission. You didn't produce a ready, willing, and able buyer because their loan wasn't approved by the time the seller breached the contract and backed out. By the way, that's a terrible choice of that seller to make, and they're going to be in trouble and have a lot of issues to deal with, the least of which is your commission. They're also going to be subject to that buyer suing them for specific performance, which we'll talk about in Chapter 9. So when we earned it is when we've produced this buyer that's ready, willing, and able. And again, when does this matter? It would only matter if the seller backed out, refused to sell, breached the contract, broke their promise, and now you or the other firm is suing the seller to pay your commission. That's when we're dealing with this issue and period. When do we actually get the money? When it's a successful transaction, after we've earned it. Maybe in a timeline, it might look like this. we've got this timeline where we go under contract right here. And then here's closing day. And then somewhere along the line here is something called a due diligence deadline that we'll talk more about later. This is basically the period where we're going to do any kind of inspections. The buyer's going to have any sort of questions answered, and the buyer's deciding to back out or not. Do I want to go through with this or not? That's the due diligence period. This amount of time. So let's say anywhere in this period of time, all the way in the due diligence period, all the way up to closing date, the seller says, you know what? I'm out. Forget it. Sale's over. I'm not selling. The seller just breached the contract because they agreed to give the buyer this due diligence amount of time and then this total amount of time all the way to the proposed closing date to buy the house. And now they're saying, I'm not going to sell it to you anymore. And so we'll talk more about that later. But when did we earn the commission? We earned it depending on the buyer's method of buying. If they pay in cash, we earned it back here when we produced a ready, willing, and able. They're able because they can pay cash. If they're getting a loan, maybe the loan approval happened right here in the process. And that's when they became able because now they're approved to get the loan. And so if this point in time is when the seller backs out, then the judge is going to say, was the buyer approved at that point in time? And you can say, yep, I got an approval letter. The lender said they could, all that we had to do is show up to closing, but the seller backed out before we could get there these last few days. And so that seller might have to pay you a commission, even though they backed out of the deal because they were able, because the loan was approved as of this date, a week before closing. Now, regardless of any of that, if it's a normal transaction that goes through successfully, here's our day. Our closing date, more specifically, a better term is settlement date. There's a difference that we'll learn between settlement and closing. Settlement is the signing of papers. Closing is the recording of the deed after everything is all done. And we'll get more into that, more details later. This is the point where you're getting paid. This is when you actually get your check, is here after settlement signing has happened and the attorney has recorded the deed, the new deed, at the courthouse. And I just did that this week. And it was an issue this week because let me think, what was the day? We hurried up the closing. It was going to be on Monday, but we bumped it to this past Monday. And so on Monday, I went with my seller. I drove her to it. She was my high service seller. And that was the buy. She was buying. And so I drove her there. She signed the papers, but she had to wire the money from her account. And the wire was going to take a long time. And so they couldn't record the deed on Monday because the money couldn't get into the attorney's account on Monday because it was going to take a couple of days for the bank to approve the wire. It was several hundred thousands. It was like $700,000-$800,000. They're not just going to wire that with a 5-minute notice and somebody saying, yeah, it's me, I promise. Too many terrorist activities, too many fraudulent people. It's just too much red tape, too many red flags. Thankfully, she worked for the actual bank. The bank her money was in was her bank of employment. She's a manager. And so she was able to prove her identity quicker than the average customer could because they already had vetted her and approved her to work there. So that helped. So we got that because of her willingness and tenacity to be on the phone and ask people over and over to go check and could you do this, please? We're in a hurry. We're trying to get this done. She made it happen. To her credit, she really made it happen after probably being a couple hours on hold and back and forth and asking people to please check, and got that wire done in basically 25 hours between the original request. And so yesterday, the wire finally went through. I knew it was coming because she was keeping me posted. I went ahead and drove from Concord to Charlotte, 20 minutes, sat in the parking lot, Then went on into the attorney's waiting room, sat in front of them. And I'm like, no rush, guys. I'm just here for when the wire goes through so you can go ahead and give me the keys and my check because it was her purchase. So therefore, she wasn't getting a check because she was buying that one. So I was going to pick up her keys and take them to her. And it worked. The wire went through. The attorney wasn't done. They then had to take the deed they had written out and made and go online to the Register of Deeds office of Mecklenburg County and record it. Put it on the public record. Now it's recorded. Now it was closed. Now I could get the keys to give to my client and my check of commission. So I received my check. I had earned it, let me think, maybe 3 weeks ago when this buyer came along and made a cash offer on her house about 3 weeks ago. That's the only reason we closed so fast, is because there was no loan to deal with. So I earned it 3 weeks ago, but I got it yesterday. With me? So we've still earned and are entitled to the commission even if some fall throughs happen. That's the whole point of all of that. If it falls through because a spouse won't sign the papers, one spouse signed but the other didn't, and it falls through over that, you still would be entitled to sue them if you had to and get your commission. If you want to do that, right? You may choose, and you and your firm might choose, we don't want to sue them. We'll just take the loss. But sometimes you might have to sue them. Oh, sorry. Let me give you slides. There we go. Because if you're the listing agent and the buying agent side is suing you for the commission because your seller walked away and breached the contract, then you're probably going to need to sue your seller to get the money to pay the buyer agency commission that they were promised, that your seller's cheating everybody out of because they're breaching the contract. So that's kind of how that might work in real life. If this all comes up, you're not going to be all that involved. You're not an attorney. You're going to turn it over to attorneys, and you're going to need to be able to provide the documentation, yes, but this isn't something you're really handling. Besides, hey, seller, that's a terrible idea if you want to walk away from this, because here's what you're subject to dealing with. Paying commissions. The other firm might sue you over commissions. The buyer could sue you to actually force you to sell it anyway. They might sue you to get back all the money they spent on inspections and deposits, and all of that's, in other words, a seller needs to be sure before they sign the contract. If there's a chance that they're going to want to back out of it, there's no way they should sign it at all because they're subject to losing a lot. What other ways could they fall through, but the sellers still have to pay you? Some sort of a title defect or a cloud on the title that can't be resolved, and it causes the transaction to fall through. It's on the seller's shoulders to fix this. And if they're not willing to fix it or able to fix it and it falls through, but you produced a ready, willing, and able buyer, then you still are entitled to the commission. Again, they might not just freely give it to you. You might have to sue them in court over it. But yeah, you could be entitled to it because it's a clouded title issue that either caused them to not be able to sell it or not choose to sell it. Again, what's the question the judge is going to ask? Did you have a ready, willing, and able buyer? If they can't deliver possession, if they require terms that weren't in the original listing contract, they try to come along with extra stuff, and you're like, we didn't talk about this originally. You signed a listing agreement with me and my firm, and you didn't mention any of this stuff back then, so why are you trying to add it now? Well, I don't care. I'm out of here. Okay. I've produced a ready, willing, and able buyer. I'm expecting the commission. That's how that could possibly work. If the buyer and seller decide not to buy it and sell it anymore, between them, they might say, you know what? Buyer's loan isn't approved, so they don't want to buy. The seller might say, you know what? I feel bad for you. Good luck to you. I'm just not going to sell anymore either. Just because the buyer and the seller agree to let that contract go away, doesn't mean that you've not earned the money. You at one point had produced a ready, willing, and able buyer. Now they were choosing not to buy, but they were ready, willing, and able once upon a time. Then yeah, you could still be entitled to the commission. And then again, if the buyer breaches the contract, either side could breach it. The seller could breach it, the buyer could breach it. That just means breaking their promise to do it. We're going to get more into that in the next 2 chapters, but let me talk about that buyer breach thing a minute. It goes back to the diagram, and we've got this due diligence period here. For one thing, when the buyer made their offer, they needed to write 2 checks. There's 2 checks, 2 chunks of money. One of them is called due diligence fee, and it is non-refundable. And the other one is called earnest money, and it is refundable, potentially, possibly. The due diligence fee is not refundable, though, and that one is so non-refundable that, well, for one thing, once you go under contract here in the very first part, when everybody has agreed to the contract, now we're under contract, that buyer needs to give the due diligence money to the seller immediately. Immediately due once we go under contract. And now that money is in the possession of the seller. It is a check made to the seller's name. The due diligence deposit is immediately spendable. They could spend it on a car or a trip or anything because they're probably not going to have to give it back. In a very rare case might they maybe have to give it back, but only if they themselves breached the seller. But in the case of the buyer, they're never getting this due diligence money back. What if the buyer has a home inspection during this due diligence period, and that home inspection reveals $30,000 worth of problems? Mold, moldy termites. It's got leaky roof. It's sinking. It's got foundation issues. It's got a bunch of stuff wrong with it. And that buyer says, I am scared to death of this house. I don't want to buy it anymore. I'm out of here. They have the right to walk away for any reason, including leaky roof and anything else, or even no reason. The buyer can walk away. But what are they walking away from? Due diligence money. And in the last several years, that got pretty significant because people were competing with multiple bids. And so one way to try to break the tie and beat out those other competing offers was for them to give outlandish amounts of due diligence non-refundable money. And every time I teach a CE class, I ask them, because it's a great way to survey 60 agents in one spot real quick. And I'll say, hey guys, what have you seen back in the last couple of years as the craziest due diligence deposits with offers? And I've seen 10,000 and 20,000 and 50,000 and 100,000. And my favorite one, you repeat attenders will remember probably, $400,000 non-refundable due diligence money. That means that buyer was willing to walk away from $400,000 even if they didn't buy the house. That probably means they're going to buy the house. I'm a confident seller. I'm a confident agent if they're willing to walk away from that much. So that's how important this due diligence fee is. It even applies to the appraisal, and then we'll take our break. What if they get it appraised and the appraiser says, well, your contract says you're going to pay them $400,000 for this property, but I can't find that it's worth that. The appraiser says, I think it's worth $380,000. It's $20,000 less than what you've agreed to pay. And if the buyer says, well, in that case, I don't want to buy it, they can choose not to buy it because it won't appraise for the full amount. But yet again, they are again walking away from that due diligence fund money. That's how big due diligence money becomes in the transaction. So if the buyer breaches the contract, that just means the buyer's backing out. So when you say a buyer's breaching, it sounds like they're doing something bad. But backing out they promised to buy it. They're backing out. They're breaching. The buyer can back out for any reason or no reason. It's just that how much money could they stand to lose if they do back out? These 2 chunks. They could possibly lose the due diligence money, almost certainly, and they could also possibly lose the earnest money. in the event of a buyer breach. So if a buyer chooses not to buy anymore, but they were ready, willing, and able, then you could still be entitled to your commission. That's what that other slide was about. There at that last bullet point. When we come back from break, we'll talk about this phenomenon called a procuring cause of sale. See you back here in 10. It's coming back together. All right. Procuring cause of sale has to do with a broker who started the process, originating a series of events, the process of, let's just say, helping a buyer buy. And there was no break in the continuity of that process, and the result was a ready, willing, and able buyer. They would, according to procuring cause of sale, be entitled to the commission because they did these things. And once upon a time, I was accused of, well, let me just say, another agent in my same firm that I was with back then, 20-some years ago, said that he should get the commission that I had just earned. And so it kind of went down like this. I was helping a friend of mine, a buyer who was also a friend, and he was just out looking around on his own, and he went into a new construction townhouse community and saw a visibly upset young lady about his same age. We were all in our mid-20s at the time. And he started talking to her, and she was mad because her real estate agent had left her at that community because he had come up from South Charlotte to North Charlotte, where that community was, but he forgot his lockbox key. He didn't, back at the time, you needed a special key. You didn't have an app on your phone. And so he had left South Charlotte, driven, 40-some minutes, and had set up showings to show her houses, but didn't have the key it was going to take to get in there. And that's it's a mistake. People make mistakes. So that wasn't, she was annoyed, but it turns out he had also kind of been condescending to her. It all just kind of avalanched, and all the things he had done that she didn't like all kind of bubbled to the top. And so she gave my friend an earful and told him all about the things that this agent had done that she didn't like. And he said, well, you should call my friend, my agent, Neil. He won't forget his key. And I appreciated his standing up and trying to help me get business. So she did. She called me. And she said, here's the deal. I'm using this agent. And I said, oh, yeah, so-and-so agent. And it turns out he was at my same firm, but the South Charlotte location. I was at the North Charlotte location. Same company, different offices. I didn't know the guy. He didn't know me. And so my first question was, did you sign anything with him? Did you sign a buyer agency agreement with him, or a working with agents disclosure showing that he explained how agency works? And she had nothing. He had not gotten any of the proper paperwork signed. And while it was okay not to have a buyer agency agreement signed, because he could have just been doing oral buyer agency, right? We learned that. He should have definitely covered the working with agents disclosure. That one should have been done, but nothing was signed. And on top of the fact that he had ticked her off and treated her condescendingly and other things, she was ready to fire him. And so she said that to me. She said, well, if you can't help me, I'm only talking to you because your friend, who seemed like a nice guy, told me to give you a try. Otherwise, I will not use your company. I'm going to any other company but yours. You're the last try I'm going to give to your company. So I told all of that to my manager. Said, here's the deal. Here's the person. She called me. She's asking, can I help her? My manager said, did she sign anything with him? And I said, nope, nothing. She said, well, that's fine. Go for it. Sounds like she was going to fire him. They've got nothing in writing. Free game, right? And so I did. And I did not just jump in there and swoop in and sell one of the houses he showed her. I started from scratch. from that point. Showed her a couple of the things he had shown her before, but I also showed her all around the city, down south, up north, showed her along with her mom a couple of times. And it was another month from when I started working with her, that she finally came back around and settled on one that she had looked at with him originally, as luck would have it. Sounds similar as that other one, doesn't it? And so we did. We wrote it up. Won, got the offer, got the contract, got the house, and 3 days after closing, my manager called me in the office and said, "Hey, we got this agent down in South Charlotte location saying that he should get the entire commission because he says he's the procuring cause of sale." And I disagreed because she was firing him, had no documentation. She wasn't going to stick with the company. And I had done all the work. It wasn't anything that I was piggybacking onto him in any way. It just so happened that she chose one that he had also shown her once upon a time. And so my manager said, "Okay, well, I'll let him know." And he came back and said, "Okay, how about 50%? Give me half of the commission." And this is all manager to manager. My manager telling me, I'm saying something to her. She's telling his manager, and she's conveying to him. And he turned that offer down, or I turned that offer down, back and forth like that. We got into the 30% range of like a referral fee. And around the third or fourth back and forth, my manager started trying to convince me to go ahead and just take it. Go ahead and pay it. Let's put this ugly nastiness to rest. We don't want to just keep doing this forever. Go out and sell another house. Do we really want to go back and forth? And I said, no. The next time she pressured me again, and I said, "Okay, I'll give him 20% referral fee." Because I figured I would be willing to pay that to just about any agent for a chance at having any buyer. He turned that down. He wanted 40 or something, 35. I offered 25. He wanted 33. I think I actually offered 30, much to my immense disapproval, but she was pushing me to do so because she didn't want to deal with it anymore. I didn't like that too much. But I went along with it, and he turned it down. At which point she said, "Okay." And at which point I said, "Okay, I'm done. That was my last try. What comes next?" And she said, "Well, you could go to the Realtor Association, the local board, and have them do like a trial sort of a thing where you both appear. But we'd rather not the whole world, the whole city of Charlotte real estate firms know of our dirty business, our little, our dirty laundry. And so if you both agree, let's have our own little sort of a trial kind of a thing where you both appear before 3 managers that neither one of you know and present your case and see who they decide on. Are you willing to do that?" And I felt pretty strong. So I said, "Yeah, I'll do it." And he said that too. And we met at a firm neither one of us was a part of, and before 3 managers, and I brought all my little paperwork together, and I got my client to write a letter saying that she would have left the firm and not used the firm if it weren't for me. And I did some math and showed the dollars per hour that I had earned. And then also now I've had to spend 12 hours getting ready for this trial and not making any money at that. And now you want me to give up my commission and blah, blah, blah. Long story short, they voted in favor of me, and I didn't have to give them a dime. And about a month later, I left that firm because she tried to get me to pay money several times, and I felt like she should have had my back the whole time as the manager. And so that was the beginning of the end there for me anyway. But his case was that he said he was the procuring cause of sale. And that's why he wanted originally all of it and at least a portion of the commission. But the problem that those managers had with that claim was that several things. He did certainly originate a series of events, but there wasn't a continuity. There was definitely a break in the continuity. The break at which point she was going to fire him, right? Pretty big. He had not done the right paperwork. He didn't have any sort of proof in writing. He did not disclose things properly, so he really had no leg to stand on. And so procuring cause of sale requires all of those things, right? For you to be entitled to commission origination of the events without a break in continuity, resulting in a ready, willing, and able buyer. What do you do if your real estate license goes inactive or expires, what's the first thing you do when your license expires because you didn't pay your renewal fee, or goes inactive because you didn't do your education in time, and on July 1st, your license goes to inactive status? What's your first move at that point? Most people say call the commission and try to get it reinstated. But the thing you do before any of that is something you don't do, right? Right there on the slide. Thank you, guys. Don't do real estate. You don't have a license anymore. You need a current and active license at the time the commission was earned in order to get the commission. What if it expires and you've got a couple things under contract, and the only thing left in that under contract progression is to show up to closing? Can you show up to closing if your license is inactive or expired? No, that's doing real estate without a license. But could your broker in charge show up to closing for you and help that consumer finish out this? Yeah. And could you get the commission from that sale? In that case, if the only thing left was like just show up to closing, you've pretty much done everything there is to be done. And yes, you could still get paid because your license was active the last time the commission was earned. It was earned when the ready, willing, and able buyer was procured. And now the only thing left is just the closing. The BIC can step in for the closing, and it's up to the BIC as to, are they going to do this? But as far as the real estate commission is concerned, yes, you could get paid because you did have an active license when the commission was actually earned, right? Review, just a reminder, to represent others for money doing real estate, it needs to be an active license status because your education is on point. You've done your CE, you've done your post by those deadlines, and you've paid your $45 by June 30th, so you're current as well. If you don't do the education, your license is on inactive status. If you don't pay the money, it's expired. Don't know the difference. Expired versus inactive. Inactive means education. Expired, think about a parking meter. Expires if you don't give it money. Working with sellers. Let's talk about working with sellers. As a listing agent, the commission says there's some pre-listing activities that you need to do. You need to look up the deed, maybe get it from the seller, but we could all look up deeds right now. Go to the tax or the Register of Deeds office online and look it up. So look at the deed. Why do you want to look at the deed if you're about to list a property or considering listing a property? Why is the deed important? What's on that deed that you care about as a listing agent? One important piece of the deed that's important is who owns it. You need to know how many people you need signatures from. And the deed's going to show you potentially. Now, if they're married after they bought it as a single person, that's an issue, sure. But look at the deed, see if there's anything on there that you need to know about. Look at the survey if there is one. Get that from the seller. Get the covenants and restrictions of the neighborhood, and also the HOA dues. Find out what those are. Any sort of assessments. What do I mean by an assessment? A special assessment levied by the HOA. Maybe because it's a townhouse community and all the buildings have roofs that are 20 years old and they need to re-shingle the roofs and they don't have enough money set aside to do that. So they start charging everyone with a special assessment. $200 more per month for the next 5 years from all the residents. You need to know about that as a listing agent so you can tell potential buyers, look, when you buy this property, you're going to have to, if it's a special assessment that's confirmed, the seller will pay that amount they owe in full. But if it's a special assessment that's being talked about, preliminary, just not yet confirmed, now that's something the buyer might have to deal with and pay someday if it does get approved. But you need to know the special assessment that's even the confirmed one, because that's that much less the seller's going to get out of their proceeds. If they're halfway through a 5-year, $200 a month special assessment, it's 2.5 years to go. That would be $6,000 more that they owe on this special assessment. And so when you do your seller net sheet, you're going to have a $6,000 line item to take off of that amount that they're going to get from the closing proceeds. So you're going to want to know this so you can give them an accurate idea of what they're going to walk away with from the closing. The best way to get those top 4 bullets, the quickest, easiest, least path of least resistance, is from the seller directly. The deed, sure, you can get that on your own, but all the other things, the seller is going to have a much easier time either already having them to give you or calling the HOA and getting those covenants and restrictions. HOAs are more difficult to work with unless you're a seller. They're not as quick. They might even charge you for copies of those things, but get them through the seller is the best way. And we need to give the seller some things too. We're going to give them the working with agents disclosure. We're going to tell them how agency works. Hey guys, you're having me here tonight to talk about listing your house, in which case I would be your agent. But all those other agents out there are sub-agents to you. Here's what that means. They don't know anything about you, and I'm not going to tell any of them your secrets, but officially their title, unless they're a buyer agent, is by default a sub-agent to you, and I'll have that discussion with them. And then 2 disclosures are required, minimum. Depending on the situation, some other disclosures might be, but these are required for just about everybody. A mineral oil and gas rights disclosure that we'll look at together. And it's a 2-pager, and it just says, have you given anybody else permission to drill or mine under your property in the ground for minerals, oil, or gas? Has the previous owner done it that you know of? Have you done it, or do you plan to do it? Check the boxes. And you want that disclosure from that seller because that's a whole other issue. If they've sold those rights to someone else, potential buyers need to know that they're buying a property that includes a deed for subsurface rights held by someone else. Pretty big deal. In fact, there was a home builder, D.R. Horton. Anybody heard of D.R. Horton? In North Carolina, who had buried in their 100-page contract that they had permission, and they had actually sold the rights to someone else to drill or mine for mineral, oil, or gas. They had sold off the subsurface rights in a particular neighborhood. Finally, some buyer or an agent got to that page and found it in the contract and raised a fuss about it, and they eventually stopped doing it. And don't do that anymore in North Carolina. But I just saw in the last couple of years they're doing it in Florida. And now Florida people are mad about it too. So the mineral oil and gas rights disclosure is to get that above board on the table, make sure everybody knows what the status is of those subsurface rights. The residential property disclosure form is currently a 4-page form, soon to be an 8-page form when they approve the final version. For your purposes on the test, it's 4 pages, same content. They're going to add about 4 more things. One of them is like an elevator. If the house has an elevator, do you know of any problems with it? But for the most part, it's that. It's anything wrong with the property, or what can you tell a seller about the owner's association? Do they owe any money? Did you know an HOA might not handle their finances properly? They might be getting sued. They might be going bankrupt. They might owe people money. And so it's important for a buyer to know the financial health of the HOA they're getting themselves into, and they're about to own a property governed by this HOA. Look at the financials of the HOA. So the disclosure encompasses all of those things. What does the HOA fees include? Is there any sort of any problems financially with that HOA, among other things about the property? Does the roof leak? How old is the roof? What kind of plumbing pipes? We'll look at those things here in a minute. So these 3 things are coming from you. whether you're there for a listing appointment or even if you're there talking to a for sale by owner because your buyer might want to buy, you're going to want to get these disclosures signed by that for sale by owner as well, because they are required to provide them too. A lot of them don't realize this, but the agent is the best source for these things and the knowledge that they need to provide it. Let's take a look. I'm sorry, Victor. That's rough. Sick dogs are no fun. Okay, 1 second here. RPOADS. The acronym is RPOADS, Residential Property Owners, a Residential Property and Owners Association disclosure. There we go. Made me do a restart. 1 second. So the first page of this RPOADS that I'm about to show you goes over the rules and how it works. And one important thing that's testable for you to know is that by not providing this disclosure soon enough, you as the listing agent could result in giving that buyer a 3-day loophole of time that they could walk away just because you got this to them too late. So this box down here says, if the owner does not give you a residential property disclosure statement by the time you make your offer to purchase the property, you need to have this available. As a listing agent, I attach it in the MLS. If I know an offer's coming in, I'll go ahead and be redundant and email it directly to the agent. I don't want to give them any chance to miss this thing, because if they don't have it by the time they make their offer, that buyer could cancel a contract once they've agreed to a contract. They make their offer, the seller maybe goes back and forth with them, counter offers a few times, and then they all agree and the contract gets signed by both parties. Now we're under contract. If that's the point when you finally gave them this disclosure, then within 3 calendar days following the date of that contract, or 3 calendar days following when they receive the disclosure, whichever comes first, they can walk away. Just because you got it to them after the offer was made. So let's just close that gap. As a listing agent, don't give people that loophole. They would have to do some things. The agent will need to personally deliver or mail written notice of the decision to cancel in the event they wanted to do so. And this little loophole 3-day thing does not apply once you have actually bought and started to occupy the property. You can't then come back and say, I never got the disclosure. This is something that all would happen before final closing. But that's what this is how important this document is. Here's the other thing. In which cases does it apply? Which sales require this document? And it's not all of them. Because if you look right down here, it says, item 1, a disclosure statement is not required for some transactions. And the most common ones that don't require this is the first sale, meaning new construction does not require this form, which makes sense if you think about it. Because how old is the roof? 0. It's new. Not really had time for things to go wrong yet. So this document not required for new. And then if it's residential property pursuant to a lease with an option to purchase, if the leasee occupies or intends to occupy the dwelling, you don't have to. In other words, if you're renting to own this property and you've been living in it for the last however long, You know what's up with it. You already know what's wrong with it. So they don't have to give you this if you exercise your option and actually buy it. This is not required anymore because you were living there this whole time. And then there's about 13 other exemptions. Let's take a look at a couple of them. And the easiest way to do that is to cut and paste GS 47E-2 right there, and then go over to the internet, any random Google search, and then plug in that GS number. And pops right up. North Carolina General Statutes. The following transfers of property are exempt from basically the disclosure. And so if it's a sale or a transfer because of a court order related to an estate, foreclosure, if it's a foreclosure sale, that document is not required. So new construction and foreclosures are two very common recurring types of sales where you don't need to worry about that disclosure form being done. Transfers of eminent domain. The government's taken over property through eminent domain. The seller doesn't have to provide this disclosure. Transfers resulting from a decree for specific performance. Well, there's that word again. If the court is giving the property to the buyer because of specific performance, the seller doesn't have to provide this form. A deed of trust. Let's see. Oh, like a trustee under a deed of trust or mortgage under a mortgage, or if it's coming from the bank to you, again, foreclosure, then this is not required. If it's a deceased estate, guardianship, conservatorship, or trust, then you don't have to provide this disclosure. If it's one or more co-owners buying out another owner, they already were the owner. They already know what's up with the property. They don't have to provide a disclosure in that situation. If it's a spouse buying it, or people in this is my favorite phrase, lineal line of consanguinity, blood relative. Sanguine is blood. So if it's relatives or spouses in a divorce, like this next one, again, disclosure not required. If it's owner failed to pay taxes and therefore they're losing the property, that owner doesn't have to provide the disclosure when the taxing authority takes the property back from them. And then these next items are about the mineral, oil, and gas rights disclosure. They're not required for new construction, lease with option, or when parties agree not to complete the property disclosure statement. In other words, I said that wrong. These are all the possibilities of the RPOs, but the MOG is still required. But the residential property disclosure still is optional if the parties agree not to do it. Now, for your test, you don't need to know all of these. Just know the new construction and the foreclosure doesn't require it. That's pretty much, they're not going to test you to that same level. But I just wanted you to see that there's more than just that one reason. Here we go. Okay, so we know when this is not required. We know that we need to get it to the buyer or their agent at time of offer, or you're giving them 3 days potentially to back out. This first page is where everybody's going to sign. And then let's look at it itself. Here's the second page, a lot of fine print. And the most important part here is the check boxes. These words, these items are worded such that, is there any problem with this thing, that thing, or the other thing, septic, water source, stuff like that. And the seller has 3 choices. Yes, there is a problem. Check the box. No, there's no problem. Check that box. Or they could check no representation for this entire disclosure. They could check the box and say, I'm not telling if there's a problem or not because I don't have to. They could say nothing. They do have to provide the form, but the form could be useless because it could be just a bunch of no representation. If you were a seller, which would you check? What would you do? If we were in a listing appointment and you're a seller and I'm explaining this to you, what would you be inclined to want to do? There's no wrong answer. I'm just curious. Victor doesn't want any liability. Joe doesn't either. They're checking no rep the whole way through. Some of you might have thought, well, if there's no problem, that probably looks good. So let's just tell everybody that there's no problems with anything. Great. But if there is a problem, some of you might want to check no representation for the ones that are a problem, just in case. That protects you. And some of you might say, I don't care. Yes, no, whatever. There's no wrong answer here. The only thing that would be wrong that you need to counsel the seller about is, hey, seller, if you know there's something wrong with it, you can't check no. You definitely can't lie. But you could check no representation, because in that case, you're just saying, I don't know. And Victor and some attorneys that I've heard of who own property, they're just wanting to limit liability. And so they might say, just because I can, I'm gonna. So I'm just gonna check no representation. But what's the downside maybe? Why might you want to not check no representation on this document for the whole document? Maybe an item or two, but not the whole document. Would there be a downside to checking nothing but no representation? Yeah, Deborah points it out perfectly. It might cause unnecessary alarm. That buyer might start getting skeptical and look even closer. The inspector might look even closer and say, what are they hiding? They checked no representation. They must be hiding something, even though it was just that you didn't want to incur the liability. So yeah, fair point. These are all things you're going to talk through with your seller and say, here's why you might want to do this versus that. But it's your choice, seller. It's up to you. But here's what we could be facing. And we won't go through every single thing here. You can on your own, but look, what year was the dwelling constructed? Fill in the blank. Maybe explain if necessary might be the case where, well, the core part of the house was built in 1918 and then they added a wing in 1930, stuff like that. And sometimes, obviously, yes and no doesn't have any relevance to that question, so there's no box for it. Is there a problem with the foundation, chimney, slabs, windows, doors, ceilings? Yes, no, or no representation. What are the walls made of? Brick, wood, stone? There's no real reason for yes or no there. You could say, I don't know what it's made of, and therefore that's why no representation is an option. What year was the roof? Explain if necessary. I don't know. I'm pretty new when I bought it, but I don't know for sure. I have no records. That could be an answer. So on down the line, leakage with the roof, water seepage, wet basement, electrical problems, plumbing problems, heating and air problems. What's the heat source? Furnace, heat pump. What's the cooling source? What's the fuel source? Electric, gas, propane. All sorts of things about the property. How's it handling its water and its sewer? Wastewater. Is there a septic system? Malfunctions with doodads and stuff like ceiling fans and attic fans and appliances. And then if we get to the next page, more of the same, but then a line down here, a couple lines to explain more, elaborate. If you checked yes, tell us what that was about. Give us some explanation. You could attach more sheets if you needed to. So the whole second 1.5 pages of this thing, from 2 to the half page of 3, is about the property pretty much. Nuisances, noise, odor, smoke, things down the road, toxic substances, zoning ordinances, flood hazard zones, private roads. We've talked about that and the importance of that before. Is there a private road agreement for maintaining that road? Then when we get halfway through page 3, it starts with the information about the owners association, if there is one. If there's a homeowners association, what is it? Who is it? What's the contact info? How much is it? per month, per year, per quarter. If you don't know, again, yes, no, or no representation. And then fill in the blank for the details of the contact and the name. And then finally, page 4, top of the page is a couple items about the HOA. One of them that people never know the answer to is, are any fees charged with the HOA in the transfer to a new owner? The HOAs, have you seen this out there in your transactions for your properties? The homeowner associations have gotten onto a little money-making kick where they will charge a seller for leaving and a buyer for coming in. They might charge $500 for the new buyer to get their account set up with the HOA. They might charge $500, $200 for the seller to leave. And it's just a fee. It's pretty much unavoidable, not negotiable. Now, if the seller doesn't know for sure if that fee exists, then they probably are going to check no representation. And then I'm going to call or they're going to call. We're going to figure it out later. But let's just go ahead and get this form filled out. And I would rather them check no rep and let me go ahead and get it on the market. And we'll handle this question later. So then the other part here is, are there any dues that have been approved by the HOA? And if so, what are they? Approved. Special assessments that are approved special assessments have to be paid by who? Who pays the special assessments that are already approved and confirmed? Seller or buyer? What if it's one of those special assessments so big that it's going to take a couple of years to pay it and the seller's been paying $100 a month? Seller or buyer? Same answer. Same answer. The seller still has to pay it, but now they don't have a couple more years to pay it. They're going to have to get the lump sum that's owed. How much is still left? $100 a month times the remaining 11 months. $1,100 is going to be that much, another line item the seller's going to have to pay from their closing proceeds. Because it's an approved or confirmed special assessment. If there were projected or proposed special assessments, and this is in the contract more so than this document, but any sort of, we're talking about it, we haven't decided for sure kind of special assessments, that's something the buyer's going to need to be prepared for. Tell the buyer, hey guys, once you become the owner, they might finally confirm all that and you might have to deal with this. But right now it's not definitive. They're just talking about it. And then any unsatisfied judgments against the property, judgments, lawsuits, things like that. And then judgments against the homeowners association as well. And then finally, the last half of the page is check the box. What do your dues cover? Management, probably. Exterior building maintenance, not necessarily, unless maybe it's a townhouse or a condo. Master insurance policy, usually. Exterior landscaping or yard mowing. Common area maintenance, that's another typical one for HOA. Trash removal, that might be handled by someone else. Street lights, water, sewer, all that sort of thing. That's the RPODs. That's the Residential Property Owners and Association. Residential Property and Owners Association disclosure. And that's pretty much what you need to know. The 3-day loophole, if you don't get it to the buyer by the time the offer is made, it's not needed, required in the event of a new construction, sale, or a foreclosure, among some others like a divorce or a family exchange or transfer. And then the yes, no, or no representation options. That's pretty much what you'll see there. Let me show you the MOG. This one is just about the subsurface rights, mineral oil and gas rights disclosure. And Notice it specifically says here, this disclosure is required including first sale of dwelling never inhabited. So even on new construction, you have to provide this subsurface rights one. And that might be rememberable because of that D.R. Horton story. Because those were brand new houses and they needed to disclose the subsurface rights and they didn't. Lease with option, where the leasee occupies, that's the same. And then transfers where both parties agree not to provide the RPODs, you still have to provide this. This is pretty much required always and forever for everything. And it looks a little different because it's divided up into mineral rights in the first three questions and then oil and gas in the next three questions. But the mineral rights are, did the previous owner sell them or sever them from the property? You may not know. Why would you? It was a previous owner, so that one gives you the chance as a seller to check no representation. But for the ones that say that you, the seller, have severed those rights, you should know, yes or no, or that you plan to, yes or no. Same thing for oil and gas. I don't know why they separate up them that way. When the buyer wants to make an offer and you've given them this MOG disclosure, they're going to initial all of these places, acknowledging that they know these things that you've just told them. And another note, one more thing that's very testable about these two disclosures. You, the agent, are not allowed to fill them out for the client. You cannot put pen to paper and fill it out for them. You can guide them. You can say, when they say, what is PVC or plastic pipe? What does that mean? You can help them understand the thing, but you cannot take the pen and fill it out and check those boxes for them. They've got to do it. Another little note in the box for purchasers, if you don't get this by time of offer, you may, again, cancel, and it's the same 3-day thing. 3 calendar days following date of the contract or calendar days following disclosure, you can back out as a buyer because you didn't get this within time of offer, by the time you made the offer. And that's it. Those two disclosures, pretty important. This one required for just about everything. Okay. We're going to talk about this thing with the seller. We're going to talk about this with everybody. At some point, this is the working with real estate agents disclosure. And it's now, it used to be this black and purple brochure only. It had a flap that you would have them sign. But they redid it, overhauled it a couple of years ago, made it into a single page for sellers and a single page for buyers. I think we went through it together already. But that brochure is still available as a Q&A, supplemental information form. So basically what you're saying to the seller on this listing appointment or pre-listing appointment is, hey, seller, for right now, you haven't hired me yet. So don't tell me anything you don't want anybody else to know about your motivation or your money. How might that apply in real life? It could be that you're not there to list the property necessarily. You're there to interview with them because they're considering you and 3 other people. What if you're one of 3 or 4 agents that they're interviewing? You say to them, hey, seller, just FYI, I'm required by the Real Estate Commission of North Carolina to tell you how agency works and let you know that once you hire me, if we decide to work together, then I am going to keep your secrets and keep your confidence. You can tell me things and I'm not required to tell anybody else. But until we've done that and you've hired me and I've agreed to work with you, don't tell me any of your secrets. Because if you were to hire one of those other agents you're interviewing, and then I end up bringing the buyer for your property, and you've told me the drop dead bottom line figure that you would actually take for your property, I would be required to tell my buyer that information. It could be that I bring the buyer, and then I would be representing the opposite party against you. So don't tell me, don't tell them. If you're interviewing people, just a good rule of thumb, don't tell any of us your secrets yet until you pick one of us. Now, it's good to explain it to them that way because odds are pretty good the other agents are not explaining it to them that way. And they might even give you a couple extra points, so to speak, in their mind of, oh, wow, she's really professional. She's taking care of me already. She's letting me know not to compromise my confidential information. And those other agents I've talked to didn't even mention this document, much less tell me to protect myself by keeping my secrets. They encourage me to tell more about money and motivation. So you might win because of that, right? Don't tell me anything you don't want other people to know until we decide to work together, because I might end up against you across the table if you are foolish enough to hire someone other than me. I might not say it that way, but that's the idea, right? So we're also going to walk through the property together. That's a great way to build some rapport, find out things about the property. You're looking for certain red flags. You're looking for stains on the ceiling and watermarks in the crawl space in the basement. I like to open the door to the crawl space and peek in. I'm not crawling in it, but you want to be thorough. I might look up in the attic. You're looking for things that might be a red flag about material facts. Oh, looks like there's a water stain here in the bathroom ceiling. Do you know, is the furnace unit above that up there in the attic? Maybe your pan has some water in it. Maybe it's leaking. You're going to ask them what made you want to buy this house, and what sort of things do you think a buyer would care about that might want them to buy this from you? Point out fixtures, personal property. Hey, that's a beautiful chandelier. It doesn't look like the chandeliers I usually see in these houses. Is that an heirloom, or is that something you want to keep? Or are you willing to leave it behind? Because I promise you, if you want to keep it, we should probably go ahead and swap it out for something you're willing to let go of, because the buyer might want it. Oh yeah, that was my grandmother's, and no, definitely we're taking it with us. But we thought we should just leave it here because it shows so nice, and that's when you can have that conversation. I appreciate the fact that you think it's pretty. It's not, because it's 100 years old. Some things you think, but not say. But let's go ahead and not tempt the buyer with this ugly chandelier. Let's go ahead and replace it with a $100 version from Lowe's that we don't care about leaving behind, because they're going to expect it, right? They're going to want it if you tempt them with it. Curtains are the same way, drapes, not fixtures. But if you want to take them with you, and they're expensive. It's expensive, especially the big 2-story extra long ones. Let's make sure what they're wanting to leave and keep. And so we can write it up properly. It's just extra ways to have conversations and get some insight. And they're going to want to know why they should pick you. So that's when you're going to show off and talk about your marketing plan. They're going to want to know how much you charge, and that might be a good time to talk about that. Some agents, though, take a different approach with the commission at this pre-listing appointment, and it all depends on your confidence and your credibility and strength, notoriety maybe in the market. Some agents won't tell them a commission until they hire them, and they get away with it. Sometimes they say, what does it matter what I charge if you think I can get the job done and get you the most money and end up with a net to you that you're happy with? What I charge is irrelevant. Am I the right person for the job or not? But typically we're going to talk about commission and what you choose to charge, along with marketing plan around that same time. We've already talked about the Sherman Antitrust Act and how the industry can't set commissions, but an individual firm or broker can. We just basically have to have the blanket advice that compensation is negotiable, not a standard amount. We'll come back from break. We'll talk a little bit about the buyer agent side. See you back here in 10. Let's come on back from break a little early because I'm going to dismiss you a little early. I forgot that was the plan. So you're okay with coming back a little early. Let me do a little recap. And here's our plan. We don't have class tomorrow, of course. We'll be back at it next week. We're going to do, we're in order, 8, 9, 10, and then it goes to 14, 15. So read ahead. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm going to go ahead and dismiss you now. Sorry, I should have thought about it before the break. And I hope you have a very happy holiday. To get a little relaxation, eat a little too much. Hang on one second. Where did I go? Okay, that's good enough. Any questions? Just let me know. Send me questions along the way over the weekend. Midterm will probably happen after we're done with 14 and 15. That's when I'll suggest that you go ahead and take the midterm. There is a quarter term. Let me double check that. What's the name of that thing? I just blanked. Class marker. Let's take a look at that real quick. Yeah, go ahead and do the quarter term exam between now and next week. It would be in your class marker. It would be that one. So before next Wednesday, do the quarter term quiz. Otherwise, you guys have a great weekend, great holiday. Thanks, Caroline, for reminding me. You're welcome. Take care.